Welcome to Parentless Podcast. Please note that in this show you may hear graphic descriptions or language that may not be appropriate for everyone. Listener discretion advised. Hey friends, welcome in. This is Steph with Parentless Podcast. I'm going to be starting something new, which is a spotlight portion of the show that will highlight a fellow grief podcast. If you have a favorite grief-related podcast that you would like to be in the spotlight, let me know. There will be times where I will spotlight a podcast during an episode where I haven't spoken to the host, so I feel incredibly lucky that I had this interview with Tiffany, and also to be able to give you my perspective on her show. Here it is. Let's just start with the name, Portraits of Grief. They say a photograph is worth 1,000 words, and we know that every griever has a story. Each grief story is exactly that, someone's portrait of grief. Portraits of Grief is co-hosted by Tiffany Bernal and Thera Storm. Thera is a licensed clinical social worker, and these ladies do an amazing job of approaching their guests and this topic in a respectful and engaging manner. Every Tuesday, Thera, also known as Grief Recovery Girl on Instagram, pops in for Talk About It Tuesday with Thera. Both Tiffany and Thera know what they're talking about, and they speak with those surviving many different losses. Find Portraits of Grief on any major podcast platform. If you'd like to support the show and have access to exclusive content, please visit www.patreon.com/parentlesspodcast.
Thank you for having me, Stephanie. And my name is Tiffany, Tiffany Bernal, and I'm a wife. I am a mother. I'm a Southern California native. I currently live in San Diego. I'm a freelancer. I've worked in marketing and events outside of the podcast world for many years. You know, have a lot of hobbies, sort of just a normal gal. But why I'm here today is that I'm a griever as well. You know, with the loss of both of my parents, my mother and my father.
This is a fact in the New City.
Little oval face that makes me sad comes and goes by. Could wrote the book of Joe instead.
Thank you so much for taking your time to come here today. So welcome to Parentless.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I would like to point out before we kind of really get started is that I found you on Instagram. It's been a great grief community, and there's so many resources out there. So do you want to tell us real quick what your handle is and how people can find you?
Sure, absolutely. It was nice to connect with you as well through Instagram. You know, of all places, it's a growing community, and my handle there is @portraits_of_grief. I too have a podcast and just a growing supportive community for, you know, grievers, people who are going through grief and loss, or maybe just looking for support in however capacity they are with that.
Good. I was able to kind of catch a listen there of your podcast, and I thought it was very good. I'll have to go back and listen to more.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Like yourself, you know, I was motivated through my own grief and loss to do something bigger and hopefully help others. As you know, it's just difficult to go through. So, you know, one day the idea came to me and it just started moving, and hopefully it'll grow.
Yeah, I think it will. So, and we can help each other with that too. That's the other good thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Your mom was your person. So tell me about your mom.
So my mother's name was Kathy. I always think it's important to say the name. She passed away 10 years ago. So in August of 2010. And, it was 2 weeks after my 28th birthday, and she lost her life to breast cancer that spread to bone. It was unexpected. I mean, she fought hard and she battled for about 1.5 years. And really through that time, she was herself in many ways. She didn't have to go through chemo, did a lot of radiation and stuff, where she still seemed like my vibrant mom. But her decline at the end was pretty rapid. I remember specifically it was May of 2010, and we were one of the things as a mother-daughter we would do, we'd go to the mall and shop around, and she was sitting in the middle of a Macy's shoe department, and I looked over at her and she was crouched over, and she's just like, my stomach hurts. And that was a turning point where she found out that her cancer had spread to the bone. And that was in May. And then in August, about 2 weeks before my mom had passed. Yeah, it was around my birthday. I remember thinking I guess I had a naivety to it, but she was sick, and she was on her final days. And when my mom practically forgot my birthday that year, which has never happened, I knew something was changing for the worse. And I remember it was hot, I'm in Southern California, so it was really hot where we were. And my mother's brother and her sister flew into town to be with us and help nurse and everything. And we were sitting in the middle of a Lowe's department store parking lot. And we were going to go buy an air conditioner to put in the house because it was so hot. And we walked inside, and my uncle turned to me and he said, "Tiffany, I have to tell you, your mother only has 3 months to live." And I just was in shock. I knew, I guess I want to say I didn't know it was coming, because I've always been a very hopeful person, and, I believe in miracles, I suppose. And at that age, I had a naivety where, this is going to turn around. So when I heard that, I just thought, oh my gosh, my heart sunk, and I was devastated, and so many emotions. When it went through that, but, about a week and a half later from that time, so not even 3 months, is when she passed away. Now that I'm a mother myself too, it's like I look back and I get it. You always want to protect your children no matter what age. And I think that was part of it. She didn't want me to worry.
Kind of ironic, I think, where you just told me how your uncle took you into Lowe's there, just how I'm sure you can remember just every detail when we hear that bad news, like that situation is just very, very sad. Can you go into a Lowe's store today, or do you avoid that store?
I love that store, actually, if I'm doing home improvement stuff, but I will say it always sparks a little something in me. Definitely. It's not always the easiest. And, it's challenging. And there's so many, you're right. There's so many details that you never forget going through such a life-changing event like this. I even remember when I got the call that she, was diagnosed with cancer as well. It's just every little detail will never leave me,
Mm-hmm. And so you were at the age of 28. You didn't have any kids. Did you have a significant other?
I was all alone.
Were you?
All alone, girlfriend.
I don't want to say the A word, but okay.
Yeah, and that's what made looking back, like, it just, in my own experience, it was really difficult. I was single at the time. I'm an only child from my mom. My mom really was, and it took therapy to figure this out, when a therapist once said, your mother was your intermediate family, because my parents had been divorced since I was a toddler. And, my mom pretty much, she raised me as a single mom. And so when I lost her, I really lost the sense of my family, what I knew to go home to every night and be my family. And it was very isolating to go through that without brothers and sisters. And I say that because I do have half siblings from my father, but from my mother, it was just me. And, I just remember thinking, I just want a boyfriend right now. I just want someone to go through it. Yeah. But if you're listening right now and you're going through grief alone without a partner or whatever that looks like to you, just hang in there and take it one day at a time, because if I can do it, you can do it too.
I want to talk more about your mom here in a little bit, but tell me about your dad. What was his name? That is very important.
My father's name was Sheldon, and he passed away in July 22nd of 2019. So, not too long ago, a little over, almost a year and a half now. Can't do the math right now. And, that was really, it is difficult. And it's very hard. My father was diagnosed with an advanced stage of multiple myeloma cancer, which is cancer of the blood, in February of 2019, just a few weeks before I was due to have my first child, my son. And a couple days after I brought my son home from the hospital, I received a call from my sister, and she, told me the news, and I just was in a whirlwind. I mean, I was a new mother. I just brought my son home from the hospital. I had so many hormones and emotions. I was, a zombie from not sleeping and trying to nurse through the night. And here I was finding this out. And I just, I don't know how I got through it. It to this day is hard. And it was so difficult juggling for the first 5 months of my son's life, being a mother and having to be strong for this infant, but yet having my agent, my father, my very ill father, and see him just in the state that he was. And then he passed away, when my son was 5 months old. So
with your father, and then that was the first time with you being a mother, and then having him pass away, did you notice a bit of I don't know if I want to call it a difference, but I guess what I'm getting at is once you have a child, you can kind of understand a little bit more about your parents. So did that give you like a different level of, did you notice anything, just after becoming a mom?
I mean, I guess a couple of things that I noticed was, one, you just sort of have this layer of, a superwoman, supernatural strength that I felt to keep me going every day, just because I had to be there for my young infant child. But I also would say that, yes, I mean, now that I'm a mother, I can see why my mother and even my father wanted to protect me from, not knowing all the details. When my dad found out he had cancer, he didn't want to tell me. And he told, my siblings and other people in the family, don't say anything to Tiffany. He didn't want anything to happen to me or the baby. And so I look back and I just got the chills saying that, but it's, that would be my dad. That would be any good dad. They wouldn't want, he just wanted me to have a healthy baby first. So.
Mm-hmm. So then was he able to spend some time then with your son? What did his health allow that?
Yeah, we had to be very cautious, on both sides, because he had such a weak immune system. And then there's my little baby with the weak immune system. He did get to meet him a couple of times and hold him. And that was special for sure. Obviously it's not the situation that I would have imagined, not having grandparents around, but I do feel blessed that he at least got to meet him. Yeah.
Exactly. Do you have anything that you do now? Now you said he's 21 months old soon?
Yeah, tomorrow. He's a little guy, 21 months tomorrow.
Well, happy early birthday to him. Do you have any ways that you kind of talk to him about your parents yet? Or do you show him pictures?
I do. I show him pictures. There's a couple of favorite photos. I have one of my mother and in our bedroom, and my father as well. And I say, that's your grandpa, or my son. So when the parks, I'm in Southern California, and all the playground, I'm sure this is everywhere, the playgrounds, shut down with all this COVID stuff. And, when we recently brought my son back to the park, when they reopened, he just was climbing to the very top of like the 5 to 12-year-old playground, and like he had so much energy and he had no fear. And I just sat him down when I was giving him his little snacks on the bench. And I said, Logan, you don't have fear because your grandpa didn't have fear. And it just reminded me so much of my dad, because my dad was the definition of fearless. And, I see that in my son. I do. Yeah. Even at a young age.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And just as he grows, you'll get to see different things come out. That'll be very exciting.
Yeah. And with my mom, I just, I tell him, your grandma Kathy is watching over you. There's nothing. The other night he was throwing a fit, typical little toddler life. And I calmed him down, and I just said, your guardian angel is going to watch over you tonight. And I don't know if he knows at this age, but yeah, I look forward, I guess, to the days where he does ask about them, hopefully, because I think that'll be therapeutic in a way to get to share about them again. Right after my mom, when I found out she was diagnosed, which was October of 2008, I was living in Los Angeles at the time, which is a couple hours north of where my mother's home was. And I dropped everything. I mean, I quit my job. I moved back to my hometown, and I helped nurse her. And my aunt, my mother's sister, came out when she was about 6 months before she passed and stayed with us as well. So it was a very, intimate experience, I want to say, just to be around my mom. And, people die all different ways. And I have to try and look at the blessing, just that both my mother and father got to pass away comfortably in their own home, surrounded by love. So
that's such an important piece. Were they both on hospice then?
Yes, they were both on hospice. It's funny. I mean, I don't know if funny is the right word, but after the loss of my mom, I thought, my dad was always that person that I would call. For 9 years, I would call him, and he was my surviving parent. And just to see literally like my dad go through, it was just like this surrealness about it, that you're going through the exact same thing practically. It was tough, but I felt like because I knew even about things with hospice and all the end of life decisions and things that have to go on, I felt a little more equipped in that sense, just knowing that part of it for when my dad was going through it.
So since you were right there by your parents, because not everyone has that experience, number one, being there, and then I guess that moment when your person leaves is just a moment that not everybody has. Do you want to talk at all about that? Yeah.
I mean, I'm an open book, especially if talking about this can maybe help other people as well. But I should say that with my mom, I didn't actually, and I'll share this openly, I didn't see her take her last breath. I basically left the room 4 or 5 minutes before that happened. It was just so intense. And I knew my mother was, dying. I saw the last breaths being taken and all that. And I looked at my aunt and I just said, I don't think I can see her take her last breath, And so I left the room and I went across the hall to my bedroom, or my childhood bedroom. And, after that happened, which was literally about 5 minutes later, my aunt came in and she just hugged me and she just said she's with the Lord now. And, it had like a flood of peace over me, which I didn't think that would happen. I mean, I had tears, but I had this peace over me. And I think it's just, if you've ever experienced someone going through pain and suffering, especially with cancer, maybe you can understand. I'm not sure, your experience, Stephanie, but I got to a point where I just wanted her to be out of pain. It was difficult. At the end, they're in a place of, not the mom, not the physical body that I knew her to be. I think when you see someone die, and I want to say my experience with that has been in more at home and peaceful environments. It hasn't been in a, tragic way, but I want to say it's almost like a sacred, because it's a part of life. You see, if you're blessed to be a mother, you see, childhood and birthing, and then death is a part of it. With my father, it was different. He was at his home. And like I mentioned, I have several half siblings from my father. So we were, most of us were all there, surrounding him. And, with my dad, I knew I wanted to be by his side when he took that last breath, because I wasn't in that room with my mom. And it's interesting. Am I rambling here? I feel like I'm rambling on a tangent. There's so many details when you think about it. It's like, okay, this time, and then I got in the car at this time. But, so my dad went home from the hospital on, I believe it was a Thursday with hospice. And I went up there, I was up there every day. And so Thursday, Friday, Saturday, at the end of Saturday, I went home. I basically drove home to where I was from, an hour and a half south, because I was exhausted and I knew my dad only probably had a day or two left. And my older sister, who was sort of, just kind of holding it all together for us, if I will, say that, just said, just get a good night rest. So I went home that night, and Sunday of that week, I decided to just stay home and be with my husband and my young baby, my infant. And I thought I was going to get a call that day on Sunday that my dad passed away, but I didn't get the call. And so I, went to bed on Sunday. Obviously I couldn't sleep that much because I knew it was happening an hour and a half north at my father's house. But I woke up and it was a Monday, and in Southern California, and it was a Monday about 7:30 a.m. And I had called my sister and then my other sister, and no one was picking up. So I called my niece, who was away. She was not here. She had to go somewhere for a trip for something. And I called her and I said, do you know if your grandpa is still alive? And she said, yes, he's still alive. If you want to go, just go. So I got in the car. I told my husband, I'm like, you got to call out of work today. Like, I just need to go. My dad's still there. I need to be by his side. And so it was about 8:30 in the morning on a Monday where I got in the car and I drove to my dad's house. Now in Southern California, 8:30 in the morning, there's always rush hour traffic going from San Diego to Orange County. I mean, there wasn't a speck of traffic on the road. And I felt like the universe, God, like whatever you believe in, cleared the path for me. And so I got there without a speck of traffic. I got there right at 10 a.m. and I went up to my dad. You know, obviously he was in his final state there, you know, and the breathing slows down and all that. And I won't get into too much of the graphics, but hearing is the last to go. And I just walked up to him and I said, Dad, it's Tiffany and I'm here. I just want to let you know I'm here. I came back like I said I would. And 2 hours after that, he took his last breath. So that's my story with that.
I love those stories where there's just something that happens that wouldn't usually happen. So that no traffic and you were able to get there and that he hung on.
Yeah, he
Definitely
hung on.
Hear you.
You know, you never know why they hang on. I remember my mom hung on a lot too. And we kept telling her, you know, you get to a place, at least I did, where you start to tell your loved one, it's okay. You know, you can release, you can let go. You don't have to hold on to all these things that might still be going through their head. I'm not sure.
You've mentioned a couple of times that your parents are looking down on you. Mm-hmm. Is that correct? Okay.
Do you believe that?
Good. Have you had any signs that you've seen from them or any like supernatural things happen?
Yep.
Definitely. You can tell me whatever you want to tell me. I will listen.
I'll share a couple. I've had more of these experiences with my mom, which makes sense because she's passed, you know, been gone for 10 years now. But one of the things was that my mother and I used to enjoy, my mom liked finding like cool little antiques and knickknacks at thrift stores. That was like one of our things to do growing up and in my teen years and young adult years. And, this was probably about, like maybe 4 years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago now. I was living in Los Angeles where I was living for several years. And so I walked to we had this little Goodwill thrift shop by us. So I thought, let me just go in. I want to kind of look at the knickknacks and see what they have. So I was going through the store and I just had this sense of my mom because my mom used to like to go in and look at all the little knickknacks. And I was walking down the aisle, that where the pots and pans were. And I looked and out of nowhere, I see this wooden sign. I mean, it looked like, you know, a kid made it. It was a plank of wood with a black Sharpie marker and on it was handwritten Kathy. That's my mom. That was my mom's name. And I just thought, what are the odds? This random, I mean, it looked like something you should chuck in the trash, like don't even donate to a thrift store was there. And it had a little wire thing to hang it. And, I really felt my mom in that moment. You know, it was one of those more than a coincidence moment. And so I ended up buying the sign and taking it home and putting it in our little garden. So that was one instance.
Good. I mean, that was going to be my question. Did you buy it? Because of course you have.
Yeah, I totally bought it. It's like this random sign with like this old Sharpie marker written Kathy, but
well,
to me it meant something.
Yeah, no, it's important to know Kathy can be spelled either with a C or with a K, you know, several different ways.
Yeah.
And to have it spelled exactly the same way with a K, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was. Another time that stands out is when I was pregnant, we were having a gender reveal party. And I went to like a party goods store. It was like I love the Dollar Tree here where you can find tons of cool party stuff and whatnot. So I was in there and mind you, this was October and I'm walking in there. And again, I just really thinking of my mom and, you know, kind of speaking out to her like, Mom, I wish you were here. You know, this is such a big moment in my life. You know, I was pregnant and about to find out the gender of our first child. And so it's October, everything was Halloween and things going on. And I'm walking down the aisle and I look down and I see this card and I happen to pick it up and it said, to my daughter on her first Mother's Day. And I got the chills and I was just like, oh my gosh. And I took a picture. I sent it to my best friend who's like super into this kind of stuff, you know, and she's like, that was totally your mom. Oh my gosh. And so I bought the card for $1. And what are the odds? You know what I mean? It was like everything in the store was Halloween, everything. It was October and Mother's Day's in May, and there was one card in the aisle. Some people might not believe that, but to me, I felt like it was something more. And then I've also just had, you know, a lot of people will say they see butterflies or hummingbirds. My mom loved hummingbirds. And so when I see a hummingbird kind of fly up close or around, even today, earlier today, I was at the local lake here. I live by a lake with my husband and my son. And all of a sudden I looked up out of nowhere and I had this moment. My son was like running over to the ducks and I thought, oh, if only my mom could like see this. And a hummingbird flew like right in front of us and was circling around. And, you know, my husband always knows when I see a hummingbird, I get like, oh my gosh. But, you know, a hummingbird that kind of comes from nowhere. When my mom passed away the next morning, I drove back to the apartment I had where I was staying across town. And there was a koi pond in the middle of this building. And I had lived there about a year and a half, just fishing the koi pond, nothing special. The day after my mom passed, there was a big, white, beautiful swan. And that was another thing that I had this just sensation come over me. That was the only time I had ever seen the swan there. It was crazy. So, yeah.
Did the swan stay? I mean,
yeah, it was there just that one day. That's it. And I talk about this in an episode on my podcast too, but I'll just quickly share that when I was settling down in Los Angeles again, I was walking in the middle of San Fernando Valley, which if you know Los Angeles or maybe you don't, it's not a place you'd see a swan, but I was looking and in this old, like a dam that's not even used anymore, there was a white swan. And I just thought, why is this white swan there? And I had just moved there. And now you're going to think I'm crazy. But so after my husband and I got married in 2017, we moved back to my hometown. And I believe I had just found out I was pregnant here. And again, driving around my neighborhood. And this is not typical. I live in San Diego in Southern California. 2 swans walking up the street a couple blocks away. And I took a picture. I called my husband. I'm like, this is crazy. But I always feel when I have these moments, I feel like no one is going to even believe this. These are places where swans aren't typical. You know, we don't live in Southern California. You don't really see just white swans pop out of nowhere, you know? So,
right.
Yeah.
How do you feel like your life has been changed by the death of your parents?
It's changed tremendously. I mean, from the day-to-day, you know, to day-to-day life to bigger events and milestones and decisions in life. I think my life's changed tremendously. I mean, your parents, I shouldn't say most people, your parents are a significant part of your life, of your childhood. And, you know, I was blessed to have healthy relationships with both of mine. And when my mother passed away, I mean, I just feel like a piece of my heart was taken from me. And it still feels empty and it still feels like a hole. And it's still stuff I'm working through 10 years later, which, you know, the death of my mother has really made me realize that grief is not linear. There's no time cap on grief.
In the beginning, do you feel like you grieved or do you feel like it's kind of taken some time to catch up with you?
Yeah, I did definitely grieve in the beginning with my mom. I think I just felt everyone grieves differently. I think I just felt so isolated and alone and sad. And I felt like when I lost my mother, I felt like I was seeing life, you know, not in color and black and white. Everything felt gloomy. I mean, I went through a lot, you know, you go through a lot after a heavy loss. And, I got to a point when I met my husband that I felt like I started seeing life in color again. So that gave me a little sense of hope. And there was a good time period there where, you know, I was lucky enough to be engaged and going through all that fun season and, you know, marriage and soon after a child. And I felt just in a really good season of life, I like to say. then when I had my son, or I should say around the time of my wedding too, I was grieving my mom again. It was a life event that, so this is why, to answer your question, it's like tremendously it impacts, because around the time of my wedding, I just really was yearning for my mother, wanted her there and a part of all the festivities. And then when I had my son, I realized that I had a lot of unresolved grief around my mother, because I just had become a mother and I yearned to have my mom there, so that's tough. Yeah. And then same thing with my dad. It's just, I think about him every day. I think about my dad every day. I miss him every day. And same with my mom. So.
Mm-hmm. And then when you talked about when you had your son and you started to grieve your mother even more, I mean, I don't know if you expected to feel that loss of your mother again.
That was what made everything just, I feel like 20 times, just going through death, like losing someone you love is incredibly difficult. And when I had my son, I was excited to have, a new sense of joy and purpose again. And having, I had prayed for many years to be a mother and all this. And here it was, I was becoming a mother. And you're right. I didn't expect to be grieving my own mother so much. And then also be going through the exact same thing with my father having terminal cancer and soon after passing away. And there was a heaviness around it that I can't really even put into words. I did have to go to therapy and I had to get help for myself, not to mention processing just, you're a mother, like hormones of becoming a new mother and all those, that life change as well. And, even when I went to therapy, at the time, my therapist was just like, you have like multiple grief events going on at once. You're grieving the unresolved grief of your mom that's popping up, your dad, you just, you become a mom, you've left behind your single life, I should say, I was married, but you know what I mean, without children. And I had just moved to a new city. I mean, there was layer upon layer of grief events. So I realized through that, sometimes you got to give yourself just grace and a little extra self-care and take it easy because it's tough. I think with my dad, it's been a different grief journey. Partly because, I now have this little baby. Well, now he's, a little toddler, almost 21 months to be with every day. And that definitely is my focus and such a huge part of my life. So I do think that the grief of my dad, and even when I was going through therapy after the loss of my dad, I asked the question, why am I not sitting here bawling my eyes out like I did with my mother? And I think a lot of that stemmed from, I just had like a sense of strength about me because I knew I was being a mom too, and now a wife too, and other things going on. Around a year, a little before a year, actually around the time of when COVID started taking over this world, I think is when it really hit me harder. I had looked back and I thought, after my son was born, I was dealing with the heaviness of, my dad being terminally ill and then losing him. And when my son turned a year old and 2 weeks later, everything went in lockdown with COVID-19. And that's when I just got kind of into like a little bit of a deep, I pulled myself out of it, but in a little bit of a dark place, just, grieving wise. I just kept thinking, why me? Why? I know that people are losing their lives from this terrible disease going on. And I related to that. And I've, such a sympathy for that. But in my own world, I thought, oh my gosh, like when can things just be normal again? And I think it brings up kind of the idea that there's never really like life, there's always a new normal, life is not just normal and then not normal. And at least in my eyes, I think with losing my mother at 28, I had to adjust to a new normal then. And then I had to do it again with my dad. And now with all this COVID stuff. So it just keeps on going. Yeah.
We'll be right back.
If you have a story you'd like to share, please give me a call at 623-396-6069. You don't even have to talk to me if you don't want to. You can leave a voicemail. You can send me a letter at parentlesspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again for taking the time to stop in. If you'd like to support the show and have access to exclusive content, please visit www.patreon.com/parentlesspodcast.
Is there anything like any funny stories that you remember or any quotes that your parents used to say or just something that really reminds you of them?
I mean, the list goes on, it's your parents. Mm-hmm. I'll start with my mama and my mom. And it's such a simple quote, but I think it just really, as a mother now, it's like, thank you for telling me this. And she would always just say, do what makes you happy. That was her line to me. If I was trying to decide something in life or I wasn't sure, or I remember being in high school and, not knowing what I wanted to do yet and all this stuff. And she just, two things she would tell me, just do what makes you happy in life, Tiffany. It's good to do what makes you happy. And, I remember her telling me, of course I wanted to get married one day and have a family. And she would just say, the right person is going to love you completely for who you are. And it took me a little longer than maybe some to find that, but I did. So thank you, Mom, for, telling me that. It definitely stuck with me all these years. With my dad was just like so my dad was from New York and he's just like this fearless man. I mean, he definitely kind of led a legacy, the American dream. And just, it was a lot of people looked up to my father, and my dad was the person I would turn to for life advice. So I think just from him, he taught me how to put mind over matter. Not always think and act off your emotions, but to act from your mind, and make wise choices. And so that's something that stood with me. But another thing, when I was about 12 or 13 years old, and my dad and I were having a dad-daughter day, and we were driving. And I remember I was telling him about something that was going on. I was probably in like early middle school at the time with friends. You know how there's cliques and friends and different things going on. And he looked at me and he said, "You know what, Tiffany, don't worry about that. And I want to tell you, in life, you're always going to have your 5-finger friends, like 5-finger friends that you can pull out from your pocket, look at your hand, and throughout your whole life, you're going to have 5-finger friends." And it's so simple and kind of silly, but it's like so true. I feel like when you go through life, you have these 5-finger friends that no matter what, they're going to be there for you.
What is one thing that you would say to your parents now?
Man, I feel like there's so much, but I think now I just would want to tell them, and this is so simple, but just thank you. Like, thank you for being the parents that you were to me, because I feel that I was raised in a way that, especially in today's world and just everything going on, I'm grateful for. I just thank you. And that even though it's hard, I'm happy with, my own growing family now. And I would want them to know.
In your questions that you answered for me, you mentioned that your mom, she was the epitome of a mom. Those were your words. And so with you, and I guess I focus on this a lot because it's something that I notice for myself, but now with you being a mom, do you feel like you have large mom shoes to fill? Like for your son, can you do it?
Yeah, no, I hope so. I'm trying my best over here, but I definitely feel grateful to have had the mother that I had, just so caring and loving and kind, and just sort of all the things that are built around the cliche mother. And I didn't know, I should say this, that I know not everyone has that. So I do feel very blessed that I had that. And I tell myself sometimes, if I can, do half the job that my mother did as a single mother, with my own family, that I'm doing something right.
You have been to therapy. Tell me, if you want to, what types of therapy you've gone to, and if you found that helpful for you.
Yeah. With my mom, I didn't go to therapy right away. Hospice and all that offered grief support, and I turned it down. It was probably, I want to say about 3 years into it, when I started doing some therapy work. And I did find it helpful to help, I guess, first off, just having someone who doesn't know you at all on a personal level, just be able to listen to you and not judge you and just give you like this neutral opinion about it. But to help me figure out why I was feeling the way I was. I was just in a really bad funk, in a really bad place. And that helped me kind of get through that and see clearer a little bit. And so when I got to a point of, I think I'm okay now, I sort of ended that. And then with my father, I went pretty quickly after he passed away. It just felt very difficult to be juggling the mom thing and then the death of my father and then this unresolved grief around my mother. And that therapy, it wasn't traditional therapy. It was more of a grief recovery method. And so that was helpful too. That was very helpful for me, just to process like the grief and where it comes from specifically and why you feel this way. And it was helpful. I've also done some grief support groups, which has been really nice. So if you're out there, you're listening to this and maybe you can't do the therapy work or your insurance doesn't take it or whatever the case is, there's also a lot of good resources, either through nonprofits or sometimes churches or just, whatever type of grief support groups that have been helpful as well. Another thing that was helpful for me therapy wise, I spent a couple of years, 2015 to 17, I think it was, with a nonprofit called Our House Grief Support Group or Grief Support. And so I trained to be a counselor, a grief support leader for little kids going through it. So they had no idea that I had lost my mother. At the time, it was just my mother. But here I was leading this group where these little kids were grieving the loss of their parents. And now I'm going off on a tangent, but it just brought it back to that piece of my life that even though I wasn't doing therapy work, I was helping these little kids through it. And that was very therapeutic for me in a lot of ways of just, if these little kids can get through it, so can I, Yeah.
And did you never shared with the kids that you also lost your mom?
I didn't, because we weren't supposed to when we went through the training. And the reason for that is because they didn't want the little kids to ask all the questions about you and how was your mom? And, it was supposed to be the focus on them. So,
yeah. I see that, but I think also how helpful to know that. I know. I really wanted to. Let me tell you, I wanted to so many times, especially there was times I wanted to, but I didn't. You did that for 2 years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did it for 2 years. Wow. And I wasn't sure where. I knew that I wanted to work with the kids versus adults, but I didn't know. It was interesting how I feel like that was another universe thing, working it out, where I was placed with little kids who had lost their mother or father, or in some cases both.
Okay. Does that play into your work with them? Does that play into you starting your podcast and what you're doing today?
I was sitting in quarantine, just in my headspace, like a lot of people. And I was really going through like a kind of a downtime as well, and just grieving. And I was a part of a grief support group that I would go to once a week. And I just kept having an idea, like, what if I were to start a podcast, and what if I were to do something more? And I thought, I don't want to do that. I don't know. You put yourself doubt, I guess it's called. But, one day I just woke up and I reached out to a friend, colleague of mine who is a professional dealing with grief. She's a clinician, a therapist, and I thought, let me just ask her. She was running the grief support group that I did through. Actually, it was a church of mine, a church that I go to, and I thought, let me just ask her. And she's like, yeah, I totally want to do it. I'd be on board. And I thought, really? Because that's the side that I need to for my own podcast. That's what I felt like I needed. So it just all came together. And like you can probably relate. I feel like it's very cliche to say, you go through things in life for a reason, but I'm trying to take my own pain and put it into purpose, and to try to, to just help others like yourself. You're doing the same thing. So
pain into purpose. Yeah. I love that. That should be your motto.
It's my motto. I mean, I'm trying. It's not easy. I mean, I might post, I'm still grieving, I guess is what I'm saying. I'm still human, and I'm still going through it and grieving, but it's been honestly pretty amazing to open up even to the Instagram world. You know, I met you and I've met some others, and I never would have thought to look there for support and for connection, because in my own circle of like, when I think of friends and people in our own little, you know, in my peer group, I know certain people that have lost, or maybe have lost one parent, but I don't really know anyone who's lost both. And it's a huge life-changing experience. Maybe you can agree. I don't know your full experience. So to connect even on Instagram has been really helpful, and really just nice to know that I'm not alone. You know, there's others out there that have gone through it and who also desire to do something more with it.
So tell me a tiny bit about your podcast. When do episodes usually come out? How many do you have? How long have you been going?
Yeah. Our podcast is called Portraits of Grief. And like I said, it's myself, and I have another co-host on it. Her name is Thera Storm. And she sort of brings the clinical side of grief in, where I just bring in my own personal experience through it. We try to have episodes out about every 2 weeks, and it's a mixture of special guests telling their grief story, and also mini episodes where we do shorter episodes on discussion points around grief. So that's what it is right now. We'll sort of see organically how it moves and how it evolves, but that's where we're at with it. Yep.
Good. And when, like, what month did you start it?
Just a couple months ago in September. Yeah, it's been about 2 months exactly, actually, since we started it. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, everybody should definitely follow you on Instagram. Are you on Facebook at all?
Not yet. I was thinking of doing a community page, but we're not there yet. Just Instagram, yeah. And then we have our link tree there for it. And we're on all the major platforms for podcasting. So
I want to talk about your self-care and your coping skills.
I'm an open book. So
what would you say some of your coping skills are?
They change, but coping skills, I would say a mixture of, I'm a spiritual lady, a spiritual person. So a lot of prayer time, and just a lot of time, listening to music, in particular, like worship music. That helps me a lot. Just get to a better place mentally. I would also just say coping. Sometimes it's just talking with a good friend, you know, having a shoulder to lean on. Gratitude journals and writing really helps. It's huge. Do you like that? You just smiled.
Yeah, I did smile very hugely, because I haven't started any of that stuff, but a lot of people have been mentioning it, and I think it will be very helpful to me. So I'm going to start for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Writing. I mean, for me, I've always loved writing, but whether it's writing about how you're feeling with your grief, that can be really helpful, or just taking time to remember what you're grateful for. I feel like when I personally do that, it doesn't take away, you know, the grief, but it just makes you realize, wait, life is going to be okay. Like, I still have things to appreciate and be grateful for. So there's that. And another coping, I think, and this kind of goes into the self-care, but just remembering to take a little time for yourself, and whether that's getting outside for a walk if you're having a really bad grief day, or, you know, whatever that is for you. I don't know if you like crafting or whatever your thing is, like doing something to help sort of bring you back to a place that feels a little bit more joyful, you know, or comfortable.
Yeah,
but it's also okay to cry, like coping. I feel like, because here I am saying gratitude journal, and that is part of it, but I would be lying if I, you know, of course I cry sometimes. There are days where, like, I break out into tears, and I think that's okay to cope that way, you know, and to not always, you don't always have to put on a front. I mean, it's okay to feel how you feel through grief, you know? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Have you cried in front of your son?
Yeah, I've cried in front of my son. I mean, I try not to, but sometimes when I'm rocking him to sleep at night, I do get teary eyed, just thinking about, you know, my parents not being here, and, definitely that. And I've definitely cried, leaned on my husband multiple times. I feel very lucky to have that. He's been my rock. And, yeah, if you're listening, babe, love you.
What else do you do for self-care? How do you get away and have time for yourself?
Yeah. I mean, it's not as often, you know, with motherhood, you don't get as much time, but, if I do, I try to focus on something that makes me happy outside of being a mom. Like I started crafting again with this I think it's polymer clay, where if you've ever seen clay earrings or clay jewelry, I've gotten into that a little bit, and that's been nice to have something to focus on. And I'm working on like building a little, like an Etsy shop or something of that nature. So focusing on something that I enjoy doing would be a type of self-care for me. But also just like getting your nails done, or I hadn't got my hair done in months, got it done last night, stuff like the girly stuff that's good as well. Or just, binging out on a Netflix show that you like, or having a glass of wine. I mean, the list goes on. I'm pretty simple, but just time for yourself, time. Yes, I love being a wife and a mother and doing all the other stuff, but you got to put yourself first a little bit too.
With your single mom, I wonder if she got time to herself.
I know. I was thinking about that the other day. It's like my mother devoted her whole life to me. I mean, I was very involved in like different organizations as a kid. And I mean, you probably know your kids are older than mine. If they're in sports or dance or whatever it is, it's like all these things that are going on. And now as a mother, I'm like, I really hope my mom like took some time for herself. But I know that also as a mom, it's like you find so much joy in your kids' stuff that, sometimes you'll connect with the other parents and that's your thing, or hang out with them. So,
well, good. I'm glad that you are conscious of taking that time and doing that for yourself, because I do think that's definitely a necessity, especially now if people aren't getting out of their homes very much.
Yeah. Even if it's like taking a bath and closing the door and, having a nice bubble bath or whatever that is for you, it's so important.
Is there, this is one of my favorite questions. Is there a particular smell, sight, taste, or sound that reminds you of, let's start with your mom?
There's a perfume that my mother wore years on end, and it's like an old school classic perfume, Giorgio Armani. I don't remember the exact, if I smell it, it's my mom, and it's a scent where it's not really a common thing. It's not a hip perfume anymore, but there has been times where I've, walked by and, I've had that smell and I'm like, that's my mom, I mean, yeah, with food, the holidays definitely bring up a lot of memories with my mom and just certain dishes she would make and all that. There's a lot, it's like the list can go on.
All right. So what for your dad is something that might remind you of him?
Whenever I hear a Frank Sinatra song, that reminds me of him. There's a couple of songs, that remind me of him. My dad loved like a good steak or like a good meal. So whenever I have a really good meal, whether that's, not out so much anymore in this year, but, that's probably one that reminds me of him. Simple.
All right. Is there anything that you feel like we haven't covered or that you do want to say, or any, resources, tips, tricks that you want to give anybody?
I mean, I think with resources, just be open to checking out different resources. There's so many available online. And if you are grieving, if you are, having a really hard time with your grief, which is totally natural, try and get support, whether that be through the Instagram community or maybe a nonprofit locally. There is help out there, and it's good to connect. Absolutely. But at the same time, I want to say that it's also okay to not be okay. And I think that's like a cliche. It sounds almost cliche in today's world. It's becoming more of a popular slogan, but I really do believe that, I consider myself an optimist and a positive person, an encourager, but like anyone, I have days that are just hard grief wise, and it's okay to just go along with those feelings. You're going to have ups and downs and all around. It's not linear, but, just take it one day at a time.
Yeah. I think one thing with that is, do you remember your mom and dad on any specific day, like a birthday or a death day or anniversary or anything? Do you take that time to think about them on those days?
Yeah, absolutely. My mother's birthday was December 27th, so it's 2 days after Christmas. So that's always a very sensitive time for me. And I definitely try to take that day to do something in remembrance for her, or even cry about her. I mean, whatever comes up. Mother's Day is a big one too. I mean, now that I'm a mom, I try to just, celebrate the joy of my son. But it's also a really hard day. It's bittersweet. I'll never stop loving my mom and who she was. And with my dad, same thing. My dad, so Father's Day, his birthday always falls on the same weekend as Father's Day. So that weekend, June 14th, 15th, that weekend is always a tough one for me too. Yeah. This year, because it was the first year of him, not being here, past a year out, practically a year anniversary, I just sort of let myself feel the feelings. But I was thinking that going forward, it would be nice to try something to honor him or remember him, Yeah.
I just noticed the dates of his birthday and then that he passed away not too long after that. So how old was he? What was his last birthday?
Yeah, 75. He was 75. So he lived a good life. He did. But he was the kind of man who you would have thought would have lived through 100. I mean, he just was very vivacious and big personality. I
hear that they lived a good life is something that is not comforting.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I remember when he passed away, it's hearing that. It just was like, yeah, I know he's lived a good life, but I still wanted him around another, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And, I knew my dad was getting older. He had me at a little older than older than most dads, I guess, become a dad. That just makes sense. So, but, it just happened really quick.
All right. I'll be checking out your podcast more at Portraits of Grief.
Yeah, that's it.
Your co-host definitely gives you that clinical, credible portion. What does she have? Like 4 or 5 words after her name? Not that much, but
yeah, she's
definitely
social worker. She does have a program, the Advanced Recovery Method, and she's an author of children's. She's a lot. She's become a friend too, and good to have her.
Thank you for taking time away from your family, being here with me, telling me about your wonderful parents, Kathy and Sheldon.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Take care. You too.
Empty faces, covered in scars, spreading fake skin, passing me by.
Parentless is recorded in Phoenix, Arizona. Find us on social media and any podcast platform. Music provided by Colin the Coco and the Revolving Birds. Studio provided by Fat Kid Productions. Check out one of the many shows available on our network. I'm your host, Stephanie Relaford. Thank you for listening to Parentless.